I wonder what you're thinking the so what is. As you've listened to me these oh so many minutes this week and read this short but pretty intense piece of literary love poetry. So what? What's the point? What's this have to do with our course? What's this have to do with your life? At one example, at one sort of English professory way, I think it's a really good example of literary allusions, the use of references to outside works, and how it works on different levels. I think it's a really great example, as I said, of another way of intensity. It's another version of using the power of nature imagery and the symbolic systems of nature to make a point, to represent feeling, like we've seen in the others. But more importantly, I mean, as a gay guy, I just think it's a great representation. I love the fact that I can hear the Insider's Code. I lived through the plague. I lost many friends and family. My husband Peter was is an interior designer, and he was in New York at this time, and literally he doesn't have a single person who's alive from that 10 and 15 years of his professional and personal life. Everybody he knows died. So I'm glad there's a representation of that to honor the friends lost and the reality of the plague. But most of us aren't from that community. Most of my students are straight or bi, or most of my students aren't part of the gay community that I grew up in. And so what's this have to do for you? And I think the so what that I find to be so important is I think Gardenias is a really good example of a poet making space for his people within the tradition. One of your problems, one of your dilemmas, one of your challenges this term is I am throwing all this literature at you. I am making you read all these old books. And these books contribute, they make up this, Western literary tradition that as Americans, as English speakers, we inherit. It's manifest in pop culture. You heard it in all the love lyrics that you offered in those first weeks of class. It shows up on every rom-com and every love story that we read. We've inherited these symbolic systems. A fancy word for that is these tropes. Trope is a set of symbols. We've inherited these. They're in the cultural, they're in the advertising and the music, and they're everywhere. And whether those fit us or not, one of our challenges is, okay, how does it fit? How am I, that tradition is mostly written, distributed, manufactured by men. Women are just beginning in the history of humanity to have their voices, their experiences represented. Not only is most of that tradition men, most of that tradition is rich white men. We're only beginning in the history of humanity to have voices of non-rich or non-powerful people spoken. To have poor people's experience, to have the experience of black and brown and yellow and everything in between. We're just beginning to have African American voices represented. I mean, right, the 20th century, sure, but only it's a tiny little bit of time considering the thousands of years that this tradition has been flying through. So how do we find, however you understand yourself, your people, your tribe, your culture, how do you both live in America and bump up against this tradition and make it your own? How do you either completely deny it, let it go, ignore it, which is a legitimate choice. Those symbols, that meaning has nothing for me. It doesn't represent me, my people, or my experience. Or accept it. Yeah, Dante, yeah. Black and white, good and bad. Don't kiss, don't fuck around on your fiance. Yes. Accept it as right and good and true. That's a legitimate choice. Or we have this choice of Monette. How do you feel other? How do you fight to understand yourself? I mean, Monette, man, he was such a closeted dude. He wrote a beautiful memoir about how hard it was to be gay but not understand it all through his teens and 20s in 1950s America. What it meant to come out for men of those generation and women of those generation, we can't imagine. I certainly can't imagine. How different it is for you guys, you guys and all the varieties and all the representations of orientation, and all of the possibility for being true to who you are and how you feel. It's a very different world, and although it's really different depending on who you live and what family you come from and what your religious traditions and faiths and commitments are. But as an African American woman, what are you going to do about flowers? How are you going to represent the truth of your experience in a tradition? Which part of these symbols resonate with you? Which ones just don't? And those are decisions that we get to make. How do we find ourselves in the tradition, or how do we make a space for ourselves in our tradition? What flower? Who's going to give who flowers and what color? Boils down to that. Are you going to give flowers as a symbol of your love? Are you going to accept them? Maybe they're just pretty and they have nothing to do with emotional feeling. Maybe there's a better bouquet. And all of these gestures, what are the small tokens of our love going to be? And Monette challenges us to think that question. And he challenges us to believe in the legitimacy and the respectability and the truth of his feelings. Just as I hope that you guys will also fight for the legitimacy of your true feelings with your families, with your partners, with your flirtations, that you're true to yourself, and find the tokens, find gestures that are appropriate for you, and that can be as powerful and beautiful and echoing as the symbols that Monette was able to find. That's a legitimate so what. Enjoy, write well. See you next time.